it is difficult to analyze what the exact impact on the economy would be. There are so many moving parts, and that what we have seen is that the rise in protectionist measures leads to a fragmentation of the global economy, one. Two, it could lead to a decline in global trade, and global trade is the lifeblood of the global economy. What does that actually mean for central banks? It means that central banks are operating in an environment of increased uncertainty that they are actually not having much control of, but that environment is impacting on the environment in which central banks are actually operating. And so you had the great inflation of 2022. Central banks responded to that inflation with very aggressive monetary policy tightening. The disinflation process started in 2024 early, and towards the mid-year and towards the end of the year, central banks started to reduce the restrictiveness of monetary policy. South Africa also did the same, starting in September. The problem that everybody is coming to grips with at the moment is that these protectionist measures could actually slow down, halt, or even reverse the disinflationary process. And if that happens, that means that central banks might have to pause or even reverse the process of reducing the restrictiveness of monetary policy as they are concerned about inflation.
All right, to unpack this, let's now welcome Professor Isaac Khambule, Professor of Political Economy at the University of Johannesburg. A very good afternoon to you, Prof. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to SA Today.
Very good afternoon to you, as well, and to your viewer.
Well, President Ramaphosa is expected to address the World Economic Forum, any minute from now, and he goes to the WEF as emboldened as he possibly can be because he's leading the G20, and, there's also some improvements in South Africa's energy offering. So what kind of message do you think President Ramaphosa should be selling to investors at Davos?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a great question. I think the foremost selling point for President Ramaphosa would be that we have a government of national unity now. We are going to have policy coherence in South Africa because we recall that issues of policy uncertainty have always been the one factor that investors are complaining about. So we're at a point now that is able to say we have a great government of national unity. Now you as investors can come through and invest in South Africa. Our energy is back to its best. But again, if you look at the issue of energy, it's also throw certain things in the mix with the election of Donald Trump, and then again also saying that he is going to ensure a stop in terms of the renewable energy, or what we call the Green Deal. So that also again throws something else into the mix.
Well, this year, global growth is projected to be steady at around 3.3%, according to the International Monetary Fund. And inflation is expected to drop to 4.2% this year and to 3.5% in 2026. Would you see this as, the global disruptions of recent years drawing to a close?
Definitely. I think if we look over the past 2 to 3 years, South Africa has done pretty well in terms of recovering from the COVID-19 challenges. And post-COVID, the government again has done quite well if we look at our economic performance. And this again also signals that we are now moving into a new era whereby many nations now need to create new strides, they need to create new economies, and they also need to attract sufficient investment to grow their economy so that they could address some of the fundamental challenges that they are facing in the developmental space, particularly within emerging and developing economies. And South Africa, again, as much as we were really hit by the COVID pandemic, I think some of the counter-cyclical policies that the government came up with that did a great job in terms of cushioning the citizens and as well as cushioning the economy. Again, this is similar to what we faced in 2007 and 8 global financial crisis, because we could see that the counter-cyclical policies that were adopted by the government also played an important role in terms of ensuring that South Africa remained unscathed from the global financial crisis in 2009. So again, this also shows that South Africa is able to adopt cautionary policies. But what is important then now is what kind of policies are we going to adopt moving forward that are going to ensure that we can address issues of high unemployment and as well as poverty.
Well, we've seen some positive developments such as, the loosening of financial conditions and easing inflations, especially in the advanced economies. But then some economies see a muted picture for the coming year, with the majority expecting global economy to weaken and economic fragmentation to increase. What would you attribute this to? I mean, in light of the loosening of some financial conditions in other economies?
South Africa is definitely one of those countries that have been seeing a loosening of all the financial constraints that we had faced. I mean, if you look at our inflation, it has been dropping for many months now. But I think one of the challenges that we're facing is that we have a conservative reserve bank at the moment, of which again shows in that if you look at the decrease in terms of the repo rate, it has been decreasing at most at 0.5 or 0.25, of which again shows you that there's many challenges that South Africa is going to face. But I think for South Africa, again, in as much as we've seen this inflation go down, it has not necessarily materialized in terms of lower food prices for many of the South Africans that cannot afford to put food in their tables, because we know that the food basket currently is at over 4,000 rand, and majority of the South Africans do not even make that much. But again, we can also put these issues at the door of many things, such as the government being unable to create more employment. Again, if we look at how competitive our private sector is, it's not as competitive as it is supposed to be in order to generate the kinds of income that we want and ensure that there's money that is circulating within the economy. So there's definitely vast challenges. I mean, we are over the issue of load shedding, but currently I would say that some of those challenges are the lack of investor confidence. Yes, we do have the GNU, but it has not necessarily translated into more investment in the country. And again, investment also being utilized in an efficient manner, whereby we could see an increase in service delivery and as well as the addressing of all the economic and financial bottlenecks that we are facing as a country, including regulatory burdens again at the end of the day.
So many and quite elaborate discussion points at the World Economic Forum for 2025 this year, I would imagine, more so because of President Donald Trump having assumed the White House or having occupied the White House, and so many discussion points with regards to what a Trump presidency would mean moving forward, and which is why the WEF's Future of Growth initiative is asking the question, how can countries, or rather how can they rethink how economies can deliver a better balance between the quality and quantity of growth? Because we all know that GDP growth may be necessary, but it's definitely not sufficient.
Definitely, it's necessary, but it is not sufficient. And again, you've also mentioned some of the core things. With Donald Trump coming into office, people are asking about a lot of questions. I mean, we saw the executive orders that he took today, including ensuring that the BRICS do not move into alternative currencies or that they do not move away from the dollar. And that shows, again, the dominance of the U.S. And I think one of the most important questions that they are likely going to have, if you also look at what has been happening between the standoff between the U.S. and Canada, one of those questions would be, how do we again ensure that Europe regains its autonomy? Because right now, it seems to be following whatever the U.S. is doing. But now it is time to usher in a new world order that is going to allow many countries to be autonomous. But do we really see that under the Trump administration, because of the number of things that he has promised in terms of taking Greenland from Denmark? So there's really quite a lot of things that are going to happen, and they're only going to convolute the entire economic landscape if you look at issues of global governance. And this is definitely an area that Europe should be really looking into themselves and asking themselves, what is it that are we doing wrong? Because again, if you look at the power of their economies, The US has recently overtaken the entire economy of the European nations, and that tells you again that the US has been the biggest winner over the past 10 to 20 years. So how does the EU then reclaim its glory and also ensure that it keeps on trying to do what it was trying to do in terms of the G20? Because again, we see that whatever Trump is proposing is anti what the G20 is proposing in terms of ensuring that we are going to have representative economies that are going to address some of the developmental challenges that are faced by including your emerging and developing countries. Now we are seeing again the US also adopting the very same posture that says we are going to be anti-globalization, we are going to be protective, and at the same time we are going to punish other nations that are not as strong as us. So definitely it's introducing a new era in terms of our politics, probably one that has far-reaching consequences than we saw during Donald Trump's first tenure as the US president.
All right, Professor Khambule, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for sharing your analysis with us. Thank you. That was Professor Isaac Khambule, Professor of Political Economy at the University of Johannesburg. That comes just a few minutes before President Cyril Ramaphosa will address the World Economic Forum.